Angelica och nyhetsflödet, vi börjar med kravallerna i Rinkeby.
Polisen utreder våldsamt upplopp igår kväll i Rinkeby och vi har med oss Lars.
Hi guys, this is Mattias. And to my regular subscribers who are here for my gaming content, I just want to let you know that this video is not in any way about gaming. I just want to clarify that first and foremost. Now this video is going to be about Swedish immigration, but more specifically about discussing immigration in Sweden. Something that is very, very different from a number of other countries, and especially compared to the United States of America. Now, what started the recent discussions was this.
You look at what's happening in Germany. You look at what's happening last night in Sweden. Sweden. Who would believe this? Sweden. They took in large numbers. They're having problems like they never thought possible. You look at what's happening in Brussels. You look at what's happening all over the world. Take a look at Nice. Take a look at Paris. We've allowed thousands and thousands of people into our country, and there was no way to vet those people. There was no documentation. There was no nothing. So we're going to keep our country safe.
Now, I think it's pretty safe to say that one of the most famous Swedish responses came from Carl Bildt. Now, Carl Bildt is a former leader of the Swedish party Moderaterna, and he was the Swedish prime minister between 1991 and 1994. Now, by Swedish standard, Moderaterna is to the right. They would probably be considered liberals by American standard, but there is actually another smaller Swedish party that holds the title of the Liberals. Now, the Swedish center or middle would probably be somewhere here. It's very possible that some people will dispute that. So now when I first saw Carl Bildt's tweet, I quickly decided to check out the speech from Donald Trump, and after watching it, I responded to Carl Bildt's tweet with this. If you talk about last night, you say happened, not happening. He just stumbled on his words, like always. And yes, I also think that Donald Trump should be criticized and held responsible for what he's saying. But the critique needs to be truthful and it needs to be constructive. And a man with Carl Bildt's experience should know the difference between happening and happened. So now here is a good example of this. So now as this was discussed very heavily in both Sweden, America, and I believe also several other countries, this was happening. What you're watching here is a riot in the Stockholm suburb Rinkeby. And when I say a riot, I want to clarify the fact that this has happened several times before, and unlike what some people believe, it wasn't one riot, it was 3. Now, Rinkeby is one of 53 areas in Sweden that by the police has been listed as especially problematic. And I'll get back to you on this list shortly, but here I just want to point out one statistics that might be worth knowing, and that is that by the 31st of December 2014, 90.7% of its population had foreign background.
So you made this short documentary. It was about immigrant crime in Sweden.
Yeah.
Tucker Carlson interviewed you about the film, talking about how the Swedish public feels about the situation.
So now, this famous statement from Donald Trump that we've been talking about was inspired by the American filmmaker Amy Horowitz. Now, shortly after making this film, he was interviewed by Tucker Carlson on Fox News. Now, when Donald Trump said, "Look at what's happening last night in Sweden," this is what he is referring to. However, as I'm sure you noticed, what we are watching now is the interview of Amy Horowitz on CNN. And during this interview by Don Lemon, there was especially one thing that really caught my attention.
So you think when rape is down in the United States and everywhere else in Western Europe, and then rape is up 50%, that's not skyrocketing?
Because of the way they classify rapes now.
Listen to me. The definition was before those numbers.
If you had not classified unwanted touching, if you're at a concert and someone touches you on any part of your body, that is now in Sweden classified as a rape.
So it
was
and
not
so it is
before.
in the United States. First of all, it's sexual assault, not rape.
But it
it's not rape, it's sexual assault.
It's sexual assault in the United States.
No,
but
it's sexual assault.
It's sexual assault in the United States, but it's not sexual assault in Sweden.
Incorrect.
It is now under the rape
That's
clause.
not right. So we're mistaken about that. The definition of rape.
The discussion
in the
here
United
is
States,
about the definition between rape and sexual assault. In Swedish, the word for rape is våldtäkt, and the words for sexual assault is sexuellt ofredande. So now I'm going to bring up an example that happened in Sweden the 6th of February 2017. As you can see here, as I'm Googling this, you see the word sexuellt ofredande being repeated over and over again. So now what happened was that an artist in a band during a concert grabbed a young woman's head and pulled it towards his crotch. This to simulate him trying to force her to give him a blowjob. This resulted in him being polisanmäld för sexuellt ofredande. So now let me help you clarify this. The lower blue line is rape, and the closest red line above that is sexual assault. And I'm actually going to give Aftonbladet some credit for this. I didn't think they had it in them. In 2002, the amount of rapes that were reported was 2,185. By 2016, that had just about tripled to 6,563. And as you can see, I am a little bit concerned about getting my facts wrong here, and if that has happened, then I will try to correct myself as thoroughly as possible. Now, one of the things that is interesting about this is that this interview and all other articles that has been related to this topic has been angled to make Horowitz, Fox News, and Donald Trump look as bad as possible, and even though Don Lemon says this,
had not classified unwanted touching. If you're at a concert and someone touches you on any part of your body, that is now in Sweden classified as a rape. It was not before.
First of all,
despite the fact that Don Lemon says this, the Swedish articles does not hold him responsible for it. They do not explain clearly to the Swedish people how CNN gets this wrong.
That is now in Sweden classified as a rape. Was not before.
Now, the fact that this original statement was made by Donald Trump is, of course, the main reason why this became such a big story. All established Swedish media are against Donald Trump very, very openly, and so far, after he has been elected, there has not been one single article about him in a positive way. And it's almost ironic that I'm bringing up DN here as an example. Fact of the matter is that the even bigger Aftonbladet is even more anti-Trump. What is actually rather interesting is that, for example, Aftonbladet and Dagens Nyheter are rather different from each other when it comes to ideology and political standpoint. That is for as long as it's concerning Swedish and European topics. And DN, which I'm using here as an example, is actually considered being on the right side in terms of Swedish politics. So let me translate this first sentence here. Darkness is good. Dick Cheney, Darth Vader, Satan, it's power. Also keep in mind that when things like this is said about Donald Trump, it is never contested. Now, Sweden is a country where it is very, very controversial to say negative things about immigrants. When it comes to criminality, social disorder, unemployment, basically anything that is considered a problem, whether it's big or small, in official statements made by, let's say, a high-ranking police officer, any journalist or politician, it is very, very unusual that you will hear that the problem is related to immigration, religion, or the fact that there is a big difference between Sweden and some of the countries where immigrants comes from. Now, in recent years, I would say especially the last 5 years, the information has been a little bit more accessible. However, when it comes to specific statistics, when it comes to whether or not immigrants commit more crimes than Swedish people, or if you're looking for statistics that compares different countries from each other's, you're probably going to have a very hard time finding it, if you even can find anything relevant at all. Now, this is not to say that Swedish media does not cover the problems, but unlike in USA, where this is talked about in a much more open way and where statistics and information is much more accessible, in Sweden, it is very hard to statistically prove whether or not a problem is related to immigration at all.
About Sweden, crime
Here's why it has to do with us, because the left in Sweden and the United States has exactly the same response, which is anybody who has any qualm about this, A, better shut up. In Sweden, you can face prosecution, or B, is simply just a racist. You're a bigot if you don't like it. And my point is there are real reasons not to like it. You don't have to be a bigot not to like it. There are social costs and economic costs to this, and nobody on the left wants to admit it, and I don't know why. It's very patronizing and it's very annoying to have to lie in order to meet some standard.
Address that. Again, when Mr. Horowitz was having that interview with you initially, he was saying, well, many people are saying this, or I went to some swanky party and people were yelling at me. Let me tell you one thing, that actually made me crack up a little bit. That is suspicious to me. Swedes don't yell, particularly in swanky parties. Swedes don't yell.
Now, let me explain something to Americans, if there is anybody watching. There is an expression around the world that goes like this: ignorant Americans. Now, if you're an American yourself, you probably haven't heard it, but if you live in any other country, it is more likely that you have. This was a typical example of that. Swedes don't yell. Now, if it wasn't for my neighbors, I would probably be able to demonstrate the way that some Swedish people expresses themselves when we get upset over, let's say, a lying, ignorant former ambassador spreading false information about Sweden to the American people. So now let me explain or clarify my experience with the expression that I just mentioned. The origin of this expression seems to be coming from the fact that Americans generally seem to believe that their country is better than everybody else's country in basically every aspect. And before you are aware of this, if you come from another country and you end up in a discussion about it, it will catch you off guard because most people in, let's say, Europe are more aware of the fact that most countries are good and bad at a lot of different things. So just as a quick example, unrelated to this video, many times when I've talked to Americans over the internet, the topic internet speed is brought up. And the fact of the matter is that I had a lot faster internet speed in 2012 than most Americans have today in 2017. But the thing that has actually surprised me when I've had these discussions with Americans is that they by default will just believe that their internet is better. Now, obviously, this does not go for all Americans, but it is definitely more common. Regardless, I don't believe that this expression is justified. Now, if you are interested in this topic and you want to have more information about it, one of the things that is very important to understand and to get yourself familiar with is what you're watching right now. The 53 neighborhoods with the most criminality and that are considered the most dangerous from a police report from early 2016. Now, if you translate the word utsatta to English, it really doesn't make all that much sense. But among these 53, 15 of them has been classified as especially utsatta, which just gives them a higher degree of when it comes to what kind of problems is faced in these areas. And 6 of these neighborhoods are considered risk areas. Now, these risk areas have tendencies to reach the highest classification of, being dangerous. Now, I really hope that this isn't too confusing for people that doesn't speak Swedish, because in all honesty, I feel like I might not be the best person in the world to explain this.
Than the year before. But look, I mean, the numbers are pretty clear. Sweden stopped keeping crime stats based on national origin in 2001 because they were embarrassing. But when they did keep them, they showed, why else would they not keep them, that foreign-born men were far more likely, 4 or 5 times more likely to commit violent crimes, sex crimes, than Swedish-born men. I'm not saying they're all bad, but that's like a real thing. Are people allowed to say that there?
Now here, Tucker Carlson brought up a very important point. Not only is there a lot of Swedish people that have been really, really angry over not being able to get access to crucial information, but what we've also seen throughout several years in Sweden is that potentially constructive discussions turns into insults about racism. Sweden has for a long time been a country where it is very socially accepted to call somebody a racist. This while it is not socially accepted to question or criticize immigration or immigrants.
Or a rape wave. That is not what we see in Sweden, or the numbers that are reported in Sweden. Actually, was as I mentioned, it was 1%.
Now here is a problem that I've seen throughout a lot of these discussions recently, and the problem, or well, one of many problems I should say, is that they're talking about way too recent years. To compare the crimes in, let's say, 2012 versus 2013 or 2014 with 2015, is that by then the problems was already here. For example, in Biskopsgården in Gothenburg, by 2011, 42% of the population were immigrants, and that does not include second-generation immigrants. So now, before I end this video, I really want to point out that it makes me rather sad that I feel the necessity of only focusing on the negative side of immigration. Remember that most immigrants in Sweden are good people, and the problems that I'm bringing up in this video normally concerns them a lot more than people like myself. On top of that, I really hope that this video doesn't come across as if I pretend to know more about this than I actually do. Not in any way do I pretend that I am an expert in these sorts of questions. Now, I could of course also bring up how much I am not a racist, but there's really no point to that, because when you make a video like this, there are big groups in Sweden that will by default just automatically consider you a racist, which in this case, yeah, they will consider me a racist for bringing up these topics. That's just how it is in Sweden in 2017. By publishing this video, I am just going to have to live with that. My name is Mattias, and I want to thank you all for watching.